everybody. Welcome to another installment of Talking Marijuana. We have a great show today we're very excited about, and we have quite a few people here in the studio, so let's go around the horn and introduce everybody. We're your hosts. I'm Barry Kramer. I'm the patient operator of California Patients Alliance. It's a GLACA-accredited dispensary here in Los Angeles on Melrose. Come and visit us if you're a patient.
I'm Yami Bolaños, and I'm the patient operator for Pure Life Alternative Wellness Center on La Cienega, a fully accredited dispensary. I'm also the president and founder of GLACA, setting the sign of excellence for medical marijuana in the city of Los Angeles since 2006.
And I'm Don Duncan, the California Director of Americans for Safe Access, the nation's leading medical cannabis patients advocacy organization.
And Dan.
I'm Dan Gabriel, comedian and marijuana enthusiast and GLACA accredited guest.
So enthusiastic. And a big welcome to our guests today. David Knott, the president of the Reason Foundation, a libertarian think tank. We're super excited to have you here and just talk about what's going on in our country at the moment. And Kenny Morrison, another GLACA accredited club operator. Want to say hi to everybody?
Howdy.
So let's get right into it. I'd like to first let our listeners know about Reason. David, what brought you to Reason? You're the president of the foundation, and it's quite influential. And give us a little background on reason.org.com.
Well, Reason Magazine's been around for 45 years. We started as a magazine, and we've added the think tank component to it over time. And we've been consistently against drug prohibition throughout the history of the organization. And so we've seen a lot of change from the medical in California to now the recreational use in Washington and Colorado. So we feel like we're on the right side of that issue in historical terms. But we cover freedom across the board. It's not just the freedom to eat what you want or smoke what you want. It's also your freedom to open a business. It's your freedom to live your life as you see fit, to marry who you want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, you've done some great
freedom
great
across
work on
the board.
that. Definitely want to guide all of our listeners to reason.com. It is the online magazine, and there's also a Reason TV, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Drew Carey helped us launch Reason TV several years ago, and one of the first episodes was Drew going to visit the pharmacy in West Hollywood.
Yep.
And that video came out the same week it was announced that he was the new host of The Price is Right. And so it was this big news story because the middle America Price is Right host is visiting a pharmacy in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
He should do a medical marijuana episode on Price is Right?
Yeah, that would, I have only medical marijuana patients.
The horse climbing up the ladder is at $40 an eighth, 45.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, 45.
And all expenses paid. Vacation to Washington and Colorado.
My first exposure to Reason, and it was Reason TV, and it was back when Drew started that. And one of the first stories beyond the visit to the pharmacy was a gentleman, an operator who worked in Northern California. His name was Charles Lynch, and he was under attack by the federal government. He was arrested and being tried as a drug kingpin with no legal right to bring up his medical marijuana defense in federal court. And Reason TV was there, and they really shone a light on the difficulty that this really good man who had followed every rule he possibly could, even made up some to follow, was getting tromped on by the government. And I've been a fan of Reason since then, for sure.
It was
Obviously,
the only place where you could get the real truth about what's going on, you know, and it was so frustrating. We sat in that courtroom a few times, you know, I was here in LA, and it was so frustrating because the man could not say anything to defend himself on a medical level, and that's all he did. That's all he was about, you know.
Right.
And for you guys to do what you did and bring the truth to the masses, you know, that way, that was excellent. It was the only place that you could get the truth and what was really going on at the time.
And so Charles has, at that time, they wouldn't let him bring forward a medical marijuana defense. He was convicted. But the judge was troubled by the case as well, and by the fact that there were so many good people. And again, let's give a little background on Charles Lynch. He was an operator in northern
Morro Bay.
Morro Bay.
Not quite Northern California.
He had gone territorial. He had gone. He had gone to the city council, to
Yes.
the mayor's office.
There's a
He
ribbon.
said,
There's a picture of the ribbon cutting with the mayor.
With the mayor,
There's
I
a
think.
ribbon cutting
He tried to do
ceremony.
everything right. He-
The mayor and many city council members and patients came to his trial in order to testify and were not allowed to testify in many cases.
He inquired with the Drug Enforcement Administration before opening the dispensary.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
really trying
Everything.
to.
Yeah, we were
It's a
there
good
in
faith
court on the
effort.
day
It was
that
a
they
good
sort of
faith.
dissected
Most people don't
that.
realize that in Morro Bay at that time, and indeed in most communities in California right now, there are no regulations. There's no pathway to do things right. So people say, oh, they have to do it right, but no one's telling them what right is, either at the
Right.
local level or at the state level. We don't have that guidance. So, he was caught in an impossible situation. He wanted to do what was legal, and nobody would tell him, this you can go this far and no further. So
Well,
he did the best he could.
I think the difference is that he was legal under state law, but he was persecuted under federal law.
Exactly.
So there's nothing that California could have done because this was a federal legal
Well,
problem.
That's true, and that's one of the really unfair things about this is that you can obey your state law and still wind up in federal court with no defense.
Right.
He wasn't allowed to talk about state law or what he did in the city of Morro Bay or his motives or any of that. It's not allowed in federal court.
He was a great operator too, very compassionate. He was giving away a lot of medicine to patients that really needed it and couldn't afford it. He was not a drug
Well,
kingpin.
I think what struck people about Charles Lynch is that he's everyman. He
Exactly.
just really came off as an average everyday. He's the guy who lives next door to you, and to see him being prosecuted as a drug kingpin in federal court, I think that really struck a nerve. I think that's why that media coverage was so powerful. It's
Right.
because you look at Charles Lynch and you say, no way is he a gang member, a cartel, a trafficker. He's just a guy trying to do it right.
It
So-
went all the way up to 2020. I mean, it was a big national story.
So where is it at now?
Well, the
Where-
reason that we're talking about it is because last week the federal government decided that prosecutors in the federal government that they're going to try to take the judge off the case because the judge only gave him a year and a day, and they think that he should, be serving the minimum, which is 5 years, and they're going to try to give him the 5 years. And it's just, that's incredible. He's already been
He's been through
judged.
trial. He's been
already
through
done
appeal, and now this is a third attempt to bring him to court to make sure that he serves his 5-year minimum sentence that the federal government wanted to get for him. And they're very upset at the moment that they did not get that this judge had a problem with the fact that much of the evidence in a court of justice in our land was not able to be brought forward. And he wrestled with it, the judge, I remember.
Yes.
And he came
Yes.
out and offered, and what he gave Charles Lynch was a year and a day, not the minimum mandatory sentence.
And he was reluctant. I mean, the judge, that judge was so good. You could see his struggle. He had to follow the law.
He did a big favor with the 1 day. If you get sentenced to a year in federal court, you have to serve a year. A year and a day, you can actually get out early. If your sentence is more than 1 year,
Really?
you become eligible for an early release. And so
he knew what he was doing.
Absolutely.
He was
He decided
compassionate
this is the
to-
exact
to
same thing
Charles.
that happened in the Rosenthal trial, is that all of the sentencing was, the sentencing reflected some sense of justice, even if the conviction didn't. And so
Right.
the judge really, I think the judge did what judges are supposed to do. He weighed the facts, he weighed the total situation, and did the best he could under federal law. He had to sentence him to something, of course, because he had been convicted. But the process of conviction is unjust.
Unjust.
Because the evidence is filtered. We used to chant in front of the courthouse, in front of trials like this, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, because you don't get that in court. And it's so unfair for Charles
Selective.
Lynch and the other defendants. You don't get the whole truth.
Yeah, it all goes back to the Oakland Cannabis Buyers Club case when the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that there is no medical necessity defense. And so once the Supreme Court set that in stone, the repair is a legislative repair, not a judicial one. That's why that evidence is systematically prohibited from federal court.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize if you're on trial in federal court, you don't just get to go take the stand and make your case. The judge gets to say up front what you can and can't say on the stand.
I think
And,
it's
it's choreographed.
It's ridiculous how the federal government is spending taxpayers' money to retry a man that's already been tried, and it's not necessary. There's unsolved, criminal cases, murders, rapes, all kinds
Well,
of
this
stuff that could be
particular
reinvestigated and redone.
this particular case seems to be, and we were talking about this earlier before we came on, almost a personal vendetta with this
Feels like that,
particular prosecutor. He didn't like that the judge didn't give the minimum.
So he
that,
went and found that judge's dad.
yeah, in a
And
sense.
told on him?
In a sense, that's what he did. He's saying we're going to come back and we're going to dismiss that judge and almost they're looking to retry this case,
Retry the case.
Retry the case.
and make sure that he gets his
Rescind
5 minimum. This in light of all that's happened in the last 3 years since he was sentenced, legalization in Colorado. Why is a prosecutor even wasting 5 minutes of his day trying to go after somebody like Charles
He's already
Lynch
convicted.
Or Jovan Jackson
alone,
for
yeah.
or Jovan Jackson
Same thing as
being
Stanford.
brought
Same
in for the
thing.
third
We talked
time?
last week about the case in San Diego where the guy is being tried for a third time. I guess was just convicted for a third time.
And I think what this speaks to is a larger issue. We've been seeing it in a lot of news stories recently, and that is rogue prosecutors, U.S. prosecutors.
There's a culture of prosecution in this country. There's a mentality about we have to go get them, we have to be tough on crime, and I think a lot of people fall into that, fall in line with that, thinking we've got to fight criminals, and they don't realize that it's people like Jovan Jackson and Charles Lynch and Ed Rosenthal who are getting caught up in the machinery of prosecution.
Right.
I think that the prosecutors are just being lazy because you know exactly where the dispensary is, but serial killers are hard to find.
Yeah, that's
You know
very
what
true.
I mean?
It's an easy
they
target.
need
Sitting
W's
ducks.
on their board, so they're going after easy targets. If they were going after real criminals, that would take investigative work and time and.
So here in California, we have 4 U.S. attorneys in the 4 districts, U.S. districts of California. They, about a year or so ago, came together, made a press release announcement that they were going to go after medical marijuana.
Despite the federal policy.
Despite the
to let
federal
the states have some
policy.
leeway.
And I think they thought they could do it in the dark. And this issue is just because of organizations like Reason that bring these stories out and really get them into the public awareness, we're past the point where they can operate in the dark. And they are being looked at quite heavily right now, these prosecutors, because they're not following what the guidelines set out by our administration, and it's a
No, the
wobbly
guidelines.
place.
The guidelines give the U.S. attorneys discretion. They
Yeah,
can really,
they do.
They can do what they want. basically.
The guidelines are
California-
political.
Exactly.
The guidelines are not law.
Right.
They're purely posturing by the Obama administration.
Exactly.
And the lack of follow through and actually doing anything legislatively is one of the real travesties of this administration.
Agreed. It
It's
is.
really past time for Congress to wade into these controversial waters.
So, what do you see the future? How do you see the future shaping up in this? Do we get some justice on this case? Do we think we're heading toward that in our country?
Well, I mean, I think that for me, it's important to remember that the courts are the third branch of government. These are political appointments or elected politicians, and they are advancing their careers, and they have the aspiration to justice, but they also, as you pointed out, want to get some W's on the board, and they are sworn to oath to enforce and uphold the law. And the federal law is that marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance. That is the law of the land.
Right.
So these ideas of, well, we can tolerate or look away or have discretion in sentencing, those are efforts to try to paper over it, but it doesn't change the fundamental problem, which is that the federal government has its nose in a lot of things that it has no business having its nose in.
Absolutely.
So the first question, I think of it in multiple tracks, is you have a political arc, and the great news on the political arc is medical continues to march. We've got more and more states, more and more legislatures. We now have recreational and in Colorado and Washington, and then the recent polls, and I'm sure you've talked about this, up at 58% support.
absolutely.
So the first arc is the political one, and there's great cause for optimism there. The second arc is the devil's in the details, and we've been implementing medical marijuana in California for 20 years, coming up on 20 years,
Coming up.
and
We're
it's
failing
still
to.
huge battles over
And
this
we don't have
city.
regulations. We
This
don't have state
city is gonna-
regulations.
First you couldn't ban, then the cities could ban. How is it going to play out? And that is part of the beauty of America is decentralized political bottom-up grassroots action. So that's what's nice to see about GLACA and ASA and these people that are systematically trying to work with these issues and recognize that there's backlash from communities and then there's build relations. But 20 years, coming up on 20 years, it's still a struggle. That's the reality of politics. And we're seeing new political battles in Washington State and Colorado with the tax rates, with the efforts to keep competitors out.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a lot of really gruesome politics when you're close to it. And that's to be expected and the sign of a healthy movement. And
Let's take a little break here.
That's a great way to look at it.
can I do the third arc before?
Yeah, please.
The third arc is the fact that this is still illegal under federal law, and this is still a war, and there are still people getting their heads pinched off for participating in this. And we can celebrate the big movements on the political arc, but the reality is there are still a lot of victims of this war on drugs, and that's continuing to happen, and casualties every day, and that's a terrible human tragedy.
Yeah, and can't wait, really, because these people are
Exactly.
hurting. Let's take a little pause here. When we come back, let's go a little more into detail into those three arcs. I'd like to talk about the politics of this and how it's shaping up in Washington and such. So we'll see you back after the break.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Podcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Podcast Network.
And we are back. We're talking marijuana, and we're talking with David Knott, the president of the Reason Foundation. You can check him out and check what they do out on the web at reason.com. And our other guest, Kenny Morrison, thanks for joining us today. And we were talking the three arcs, politics, the political situation is heating up because of this, because we have Colorado and Washington on the tables ready to come on board, and the clock is ticking. January 1st, it's legal in those two states, and their regulations are, to me, it seems like they're almost being rushed to get into place. We've spent so much time trying to regulate here in California, and we have not even a little bit of it.
Well,
and they're ready to.
California's a bad,
I understand that's a
measuring
bad, but
stick
I
for
live
regulation.
here, so it's hard for me not to feel in the middle of that. And here, January 1st, they've got their regulations, and come hell or high water, they're going to open up stores, and people are going to start coming in and having ancillary businesses that we're going to start to employ a lot of people in a new emerging industry. But there are so many problems.
So many problems.
Let's
The
just
300
take taxation
tax.
to start out with. Taxation, my view of it, and what I'm seeing is that cities, states, and municipalities are all want a piece of this pie, the tax pie. That's what's said, okay, we'll legalize it, but we want our money. So the taxes are piling up, which is causing the price of a $40 eighth of marijuana that's going out to a patient is now going to be taxed. Almost 75% in some cases in Washington. So you're not going to get lower prices for medical patients. Here's where medical and legal start to really drift away. the medical patients who have fought a hard battle for the last 2 decades are now going to start to lose their rights to possess as much medicine as they might need, to grow their own medicine free and clear of whatever anybody else is putting in it. And I think you were about to bring up the
pesticide
pesticides.
situation.
The Washington State Liquor Board just this past week, after all the input into the regulations was given, came out and said something brand new, which was that 300 pesticides are going to be legally allowed to be used in any grow. Well, that sounds like they're looking toward large commercial grows. They're not taking into consideration what patients are taking in. Patients need clean medicine, or at least to know.
Patients for that matter.
Or non-patients.
Non-patients too. So
there has to be a
these
regulatory
details that you were
process to
talking about earlier, the devil in the details, they're just compounding daily. And I don't see how some of these actually get resolved legally because they seem like such complex issues. So
rulemaking when it comes to policy, very often lawmakers will empower some government agency to write rules instead of work out the details in the legislature. That's a big difference in what's happening in California and what's happening in Washington, Colorado, is that the California legislature seems bent on legislating minutia, and so they're not accomplishing it, whereas other states are empowering their bureaucracies to do it. The problem is that process is sometimes insular. For instance, you mentioned the pesticides in Washington State. The decision was announced after the public input portion of the... If they had said ahead of time, we're going to allow 300 kinds of pesticide on your marijuana, there would have been a huge public outcry. So they waited. And that's the sort of thing that it's the downside of, the bureaucracies are efficient compared to the legislature when it comes with minutia. They can do that, but they're not always so accessible and transparent.
There's another way altogether, which is markets and information and empowering individuals to make their purchase decisions and empowering businesses to label and promote their products as with full disclosure about what it is they're selling. I mean, that's the powerful mechanism, not a few really smart people or well-connected people getting in a room and writing their own benefits into the law.
Exactly.
And that's what we're seeing in Washington and Colorado is special interests are writing the law to lock themselves into sweet deals. When you're lamenting California, I think one of the beauties of this coming up on 20-year implementation of medical marijuana is the amount of discovery, the amount of churn, the amount of innovation and entrepreneurship, and people demanding quality performance from their dispensaries, or looking to have well-labeled products.
Correct.
With and the advances. I mean, go rewind. You can now get products where you know what percentage THC or CBD. I mean, it's incredible what has happened without the government telling people that they have to put these labels on the product. So I'm a huge fan of decentralized, bottom-up discovery, not all of these hyper-controlled government solutions, because they're not really solutions. They're controls.
Well, I'm worried that anybody who has the power to get pesticides put on all of the plants has the power to make it so that the labeling doesn't happen. I mean, in California, we don't have genetically GMO because the public bought the commercials that said that it was going to hurt the farmers.
Well,
isn't all marijuana genetically modified? I mean, anybody who's bred flowers. I grow orchids.
That's just breeding, though. That's not genetically modifying. We're not shooting DNA from bacteria into the cannabis. But they do that with your breakfast cereal, So it's a different selective breeding. Selective breeding is just breeding two kinds of plants together through a natural process, pollinating one plant with another.
Right, as opposed to disease resistant, you end up getting disease resistant.
But what you're really doing is you're working with a natural selection. You're just you're breeding plants together the same way they've been breeding in the wild. You're just speeding up the process.
It's genetic modification.
Well, it's breeding the same way that it's happened. The genetic modification that we worry about, of course, is when they take, say, bacteria from an animal or a virus or a bacteria and they inject it into a plant to give it some trait that does not naturally occur, which could have unforeseen consequences. And so selective breeding and genetic modification, it goes down the same path, but it's not the same thing at the end of the day. We're not altering
Rhetorically,
plants.
it's not. Yeah.
We're not altering those
I think
plants in some way that,
scientifically they're identical.
well, if you're introducing DNA from a different species into
There's science that'll happen in nature, and then there's science that won't.
yeah, like viruses won't
sure.
intermingle with plant DNA and form new species in the wild. That doesn't it doesn't happen like that. They have to interject that stuff into the actual cells. So selective breeding is great. We've been doing that for all of human history, to find the best, healthiest crops. We don't want them going in and I don't want people experimenting by mixing DNA from different species.
But that's we're talking about some radical Godzilla character.
I don't think that's happening with cannabis right now.
Exactly.
So that it's maybe a different podcast.
Look, if
I
I
worry
want
about it
to
with
eat a
tomatoes
half
and rice.
carrot, half rat, that's my business. I just want it labeled.
Eggs. We're all together.
Yeah.
We're all together.
want-
That's right.
That sounds good.
It's a big market.
Carrot.
There's a big
I,
market.
Carrot
for that.
sales.
I want
Yeah,
that.
big
I want to
market
see it on the
carrots.
thing.
I like
Don't
shredded
hide it from
carrots
me.
on my salad.
Don't tell me it's a carrot.
People are lining up for those.
Yeah, I'm
absolutely.
just saying.
I got to get a trademark on that right away.
So we.
This long period in California has definitely had some benefits in that regard because I've been involved in the industry here since way too early, like 1999 or something, and we've definitely seen a maturing and a growing up of the industry in California. But the downside, I think, for some of us here in Southern California is that some of these communities have gone as far as they'll go. I'm thinking of, say, Riverside County. They just don't want medical cannabis there, and so there's a minority of the people in Riverside whose access to medicine is infringed and their safety is at risk. And there needs to be a place where the state legislature, the courts, step in there and say, we get it, a majority of people in Riverside don't like medical cannabis, but tough, there are patients here, and they need their access too.
That's right.
And that's what we would love to see from the state legislature, is to step in and protect that minority that can't win at the ballot box. They never will, not in Riverside.
Right, and nominally that's the role of the courts, is to protect the rights of minorities. The
done that
legislatures
very well
actually
yet.
advance the rights of majorities. That's kind of how the
So we seem to see
branches are set up.
a disparate path happening now, and we have two organizations, ASA, which really your main focus at Americans for Safe Access is to protect safe access, patient rights, and you don't worry about the larger legalization in your focus. Although I know that
it's
you
not our mission.
support
We're
it,
very
it's not your
concerned
mission.
about it, of course.
Absolutely. And the concern comes when it comes into the general political arena, and you have different politics around that. You have politics now that are in Washington, for instance. The State Liquor Board of Washington would like to basically phase out medical marijuana.
The phrase he said is close the medical loophole.
Close the medical loophole. So, in other words, there's been a 2-decade-long struggle now to gain patient rights, and because legalization is starting to pick up, and we're very happy about that, to gain speed and gain popularity in the country, it seems now everyone's going, yeah, we were just getting our foot in the door. We really just want legalization. That's not true. I mean, the truth of that is that
For
there
some
are
people
many.
it's true, but not
for some
all.
people, it absolutely is true.
There's an interesting spectrum. On one hand, this summer, the best epilepsy doctor in the country at NYU announced clinical trials with high CBD marijuana for epilepsy. So that is pure
Science
medical.
and medicine.
It's a pill. It's not a plant. It's not something that you could create for yourself. So that's the far end of medical. On the other end, you have what I think we would all recognize as therapeutic marijuana, rather that is lumped in with medical. If marijuana helps you sleep, your wellness and health is going to be better. But that's therapeutic. It's not medical science.
Interesting
So
distinction.
I mean, I think there's
getcha.
if you eat a balanced diet, if you take care of yourself and exercise, you're going to have a higher quality of life. And I think there are people who use herbal supplements to improve their wellness.
Absolutely.
Some people said 40% of Americans are using some sort of alternative medicine
Exactly,
now. So that, and I
exactly.
think that's where the future of medical cannabis is within the context and the framework of herbal medicine.
That's right.
Of the wellness model.
So the word medical has a kind of a connotation that people end up debating over, and it encompasses this huge spread.
Right. Yeah.
And so some people would say that the therapeutic part is a loophole because that's not medicine.
But it is.
But it is, right? I mean, if
that.
your quality of life
medicine for me.
But again, that's that is where
Echinacea, St. John's wort, that's medicine.
Right.
It's not prescription medicine, and it may not be pharmaceutical medicine. But
Right.
it's medicine.
And I don't want my insurance provider to buy me my vitamin D, nor do I want it to buy me marijuana. I mean,
right. Absolutely.
It's herbal supplemental in that case, as opposed to epilepsy and CBD.
Well, let's take another break here and come back and talk a little bit more about the medical versus legal situation that's happening in our country. So we'll take a little break. We'll be right back.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
We are back with Talking Marijuana and our guests, David Knott from the Reason Foundation and Kenny Morrison from Los Angeles.
The Venice Cookie Company.
And the Venice Cookie Company. We're talking legalization, medical marijuana, the conflict that's starting to kind of come up in legislating for legal marijuana. Seems to be dropping patients' issues. How does ASA feel about this?
Well,
what is
we're obviously
ACC?
very concerned on both in Washington and on a national level about.
And Colorado also is.
In Colorado, although
yeah.
I think Washington and Colorado are taking different paths to a certain degree on how they deal with medical and non-medical cannabis, and looking out for patients' interests doesn't mean opposing legalization. Our organization, Americans for Safe Access, doesn't take a position on legalization, not because we're against it, just because it's outside our focus. And so we just have a laser beam focus on medical cannabis, so we can be more effective there. But what we do worry about are misguided efforts to implement some sort of non-medical legalization policy that steps on the progress we've made for medical cannabis. We don't want to see states rolling back personal cultivation, as we've seen in Arizona. We don't want to see burdensome tax schemes like we've seen in California. And we don't want to see a situation in Washington where they try to phase out medical in favor of a legalization market. What we have to remember about marijuana legalization and medical cannabis is if you envision them as two circles, they overlap at the criminal justice system. And that's the debate we've been having for most of the last 20 years, is a debate about not getting busted, not losing your property.
As a patient.
As a patient, right? And as a non-medical cannabis user too. We share those issues. We share those issues in the criminal justice system. But there are other issues about medical cannabis that are in the other part of the circle that doesn't overlap with legalization, that have to do with the civil rights of patients, clinical trials, quality and safety issues.
Absolutely.
All of these things are medical issues that for most of the country are not handled yet. And people often say to me, why don't we just legalize it? And the I say, go ahead, by all means, go legalize it. But that doesn't fix everything for patients. And so we have to remember that as we implement a new program for non-medical cannabis use for responsible adults, don't use the patients as a rung on the ladder or as a strategy or a stepping stone. Remember that there are many of us in the world of medical cannabis, because I have loved ones and many patients who are in the world of medical cannabis for whom this was never a stepping stone issue.
Right.
It's always been about access for yourself or for your loved ones. And so we don't have the freedom to simply say, okay, we're done with medical, because we're not.
But
No, we're not.
it does seem, I mean, we live in a real world where realities rule our lives, and the realities seem to be shifting toward disregarding medical marijuana. And so my question, I guess, to everyone, does that get resolved in our country, or do we just dump that. And I
We
mean,
can't. We
because
can't dump it.
here's a problem with legislation and legislators. They are so behind the curve. It seems in everything, but in most legislation, they tend to catch up at some point. There's so much information about marijuana, legal, medical. Within the medical, there's years of research you could do before you really know what's going on. I feel I know a lot, and I still am not confident about how I put forth all the facts. Our government is so lagging behind in knowledge that it seems impossible for them to legislate on these issues that are now coming up before them, and the difference, and to make that difference between medical and
Well, we've got to work
legal.
it out for us. For sure.
So my question to you, to people who are really involved in organizations that really deal with this, and we've heard a great deal on how ASA feels about this, and I've always known that that's the path that ASA takes. How does Reason and where do you see the future of this going, and where do you fall on that?
Well, I agree with pretty much everything Dawn said about what happens when you have a black market, and so you don't have information and innovation. But let's back away from what we have. I was at a conference with the former head of the Forest Service, and he said, we're a U.S. Forest Service. We have a line item in our budget of $8 million for asset forfeiture. So to make his budget every year, he has to go find $8 million worth of stuff to seize from drug dealers.
Wow.
So it's created a situation where he's got a unilateral taxing authority at the Forest Service by taking your property. That's because he can blame it on weed. Now, this has permeated our entire
culture
or government over the last 40 years, from Nixon declaring war on drugs, the asset forfeitures, the minimum sentences. Our prison population has exploded. If you look at most state governments, prison budget used to be something like 3%, and I may be fuzzy on the numbers, but it's gone up to like 9 and 13%. I mean, we are spending vast amounts of money taking people's property and taking people's freedom. And so we have these movements now of the transition of, is the government going to take the money at the point of a gun and via SWAT raid, or is it going to take it via exorbitant taxes? So this is at least nominally better than the previous regime for taking property from the citizens. It's taxation. Well, then you start to look at what can we learn from, say, tobacco, where the people who wanted to prohibit tobacco couldn't get that done. So instead they put on ridiculously high taxes on tobacco. And what did that create? It created black markets to go buy Mexican Marlboro cigarettes that have been smuggled in across the border. You have people illegally smuggling cigarettes from Virginia to New York City.
Right. Massachusetts, I think, lost somewhere between 200 million to 700, or in taxes because of that.
But I aspire to a government that taxes equally and fairly and allows people to work out their lives and their existence. This idea that we're going to pick and choose winners and losers, we're going to prefer the medical, or we're going to prefer the legal, or we're going to... we have sales taxes, right? I mean, why not charge sales taxes on the products that are sold?
Yeah.
Why not charge income taxes on the money that's made? I mean, these are not complicated concepts. And when they're applied equally and fairly, and we all have the same standing before the law, that's when a beautiful thing begins to happen. But it's people monkeying, and they like to control other people.
David? Is there hope that can?
Well, I live in that hope, but I mean, I also live in a world of reality, and people like to control other people.
And democracy is expensive.
And prisons
in this
are
country.
privately owned.
Yeah.
Actually, the prisons are not privately owned.
Really?
They're privately operated prisons, but if you look at people talk about who is lobbying for the drug war. The private prison companies don't actually lobby for draconian drug laws. It's a common canard from the progressive left that it's these private companies, but the most powerful lobbying group in California is the Prison Guards Union, which are public sector employees, not the private prisons. The private prison operators. We could have an entire show on private prisons, but it really is the public sector unions. A friend of mine was on the South Florida Drug Commission in 1970, early 1970s, and she was brought on because her husband was a successful real estate developer, and they wanted the patsy woman on the commission. And so she said, I spent this summer, I read everything I could read, and it was clear if we have a problem with drugs in this country, that we need to work on treatment of drug abuse. She said, I went to the first meeting, and law enforcement in South Florida had made up their minds that they wanted the drug war to grow their business. You got bad guys, you put them in jail, it gives you somebody to go after. It's been a huge war is the health of the state, and the drug war has been a big engine for growing our government.
Job security for prison guards and prisons and stuff. Yeah.
So that doesn't make it better.
The privates, prisons
I don't feel any better.
Truth sometimes hurts.
Yeah,
it's really hard.
No, it's
have
not
to
that
accept
they're
these
privately
things.
owned, and it's not the one people needing money for it. It's all of these guys needing the money.
Exactly.
It's harder to take the money out of 1,000 prison guards who are protecting, who are trying to do the right thing.
Yes. So it's a game of replacements, isn't it?
That's a generous analysis.
Basically.
How so, Kenny?
I mean, it's a game of replacement. No one wants to give up that revenue. So how do you replace that revenue at the barrel of a gun?
And the bottom line is revenue. In Washington State, I think the bottom line is revenue. I think it's so sad. All they want to do is make money. The reason it passed is because somebody made assurances that they were going to collect all this tax revenue, and that's why they should pass it. That's why it got passed. They thought that
one of the
people were going to make so much money there.
Results of that, though, is when they do tax it that high, is that it is going
People
to
slip
be
through the
much
cracks.
more expensive than illegal market, the black market, which has been suffering lately because of medical marijuana, because of legal marijuana. The black market's diminished. But here, if we come in and start imposing these taxes, no one's stupid enough to go buy something for twice as much because they're paying people don't mind paying taxes. They mind paying excessive and unjustified taxes, and that's where we're heading a lot.
Could I play devil's advocate?
Please come in. We love devil's advocate.
Because one of the things that's always been a puzzle for me is when we had this medical and the proliferation of the dispensaries, everyone predicted that the prices were going to plummet.
Oh no.
Because this is a plant that, it's a ditch weed. It grows like it grows out in the ditch. We'll just go grab it from the ditch. So, but what's happened is that instead of the price dropping, a lot of services have been added so that the cost has gone up, cost of production have gone up. But there's still this question of, you do this mega grow, you could get the price way down.
Yeah.
In Colorado, the price is way down.
Is it?
It is.
What's the price?
It's they're $20 eighths, and the advertising in the back of the weekly, the Denver Weekly, it's a lot of dispensaries are like
ounces.
$25 cap on all of our.
But none of that at this point is being taxed. If I'm
They have
correct, I
some
don't know.
taxation, but
these are all. I mean, if you think of the tax as yet another cost,
there's something else happening in Colorado too, is that they have a glut of cannabis. They're growing a lot of cannabis in Colorado right now, and so because the market is relatively small there, that's also impacting the prices. The cost has come down a little, I would say, in 20 years, but not as much, I think, as people projected. And a lot of that has to do with the risk factor we still face.
Absolutely.
But also the barrier to entry into the industry is creeping up.
Oh
You know,
yeah,
the cost
there's
of
much more
getting into
fees
it.
to get into it.
When
and-
we opened, the very first collective we ever opened in Berkeley back in 1999, it lasted 90 days. When we opened it, the cost of entry to into this industry was first last in deposit for the warehouse we rented, and then we went to a used furniture store to get all the furniture. And voila, we were in business. Now people are spending tens of thousands and sometimes upwards of $100,000 to permit, build out, bring to code dispensaries. So it is more expensive now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And there are trade-offs there too, because obviously, my warehouse dispensary in Berkeley was not the safest, cleanest, most professionally operated organization that ever existed.
Right.
Yeah, but you had balls enough to open the first one. Everybody opening one
We were
here. There's
blazing a
another one
trail.
down the street.
No, I was telling
700
you, we
or so,
learned
right?
everything in Berkeley by doing it wrong. We screwed everything up. We made all the mistakes. Then we closed down in 90 days and figured it out for real.
And you guys are all experts, and we know that vaporization is healthier than
Absolutely.
combustion. And so, what do you make of this whole movement towards the e-vaporization, the e-cigarettes with the cartridges? is that it seems like it's a big deal. Are you
It's
guys
a
seeing
big
that it's
deal.
a big deal?
It's a huge
People love it.
deal. I
They
would
love
say
it.
in the
Huge
next
people love it,
in
yeah.
the last 4 months, 6 months, it's really
Taken off.
exploded.
And I don't know if we have time for the break, but there's a backlash now too, in Berkeley and a couple of other cities.
New York was
they
trying
want to
to
ban
ban
these.
these.
Oh yeah, they're
The
going to
e-cigarettes, right?
It's an
Well, you
backlash
mean-
on cigarettes, but it impacts.
Is
the
it
patients.
it's a backlash from people who don't want to breathe in secondhand vape?
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's
It's really
a
backlash
really
for people
ridiculous.
who don't think you should smoke tobacco.
Exactly.
Suck it.
There was a state bill that would have banned e-cigarettes.
Yeah, and here in
that was
California,
defeated,
but it was defeated.
but this year, but it's definitely a thing that's coming.
Yeah, no, it's public health. You should not have nicotine. So we want, and also,
But it's not nicotine. That's the
well,
there's-
but
yeah,
but that's
there's only
the
cigarettes, yeah.
the nicotine version is proliferating like crazy
Yes,
too.
it is.
Part
It's
of the
very trendy
issue
to
is
smoke
if you're
e-cigarette.
trying to control substances and you don't know what the liquid is in that e-vape. You know, you could have
Absolutely.
5 people with tobacco and 1 with weed, and nobody would really know because it's just such a little vape that
Yeah.
goes up into the sky.
Well, let's take a little break. We'll come back. We'll start talking e-cigarettes and some of the other items
Dope
in
of
the
the
news
week.
this week. Dope of the
Dope of
week.
the week.
We'll see you on the other side of the break.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FY. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
And we are back with Talking Marijuana. Our guest, David Knott from Reason Foundation, and Kenny Morrison from here in Los Angeles, the Venice Baking Company.
Cookie company.
The Venice Cookie Company. I got it right. Okay, so some interesting things in the news this week. One thing, let's just see what I sort of go around the horn and see where people are thinking about this. The NAACP came out and sort of gave their a nod toward medical. Marijuana, something that was a big benchmark, having an organization like them come on board, and
Growing
it was
coalition for medical cannabis.
a
It's
coalition,
great,
yeah, growing the coalition for medical cannabis. That's a
been
great
a
way
multi-year goal of ours is to get that tent bigger and bigger.
Yeah, the tent needs to be big because medical cannabis can help people from all walks of life, and all walks of life need to help and support those patients that are using it. So I thought that was a great news item. Very happy to see that.
They should change the C in NAACP to cannabis because colored's really outdated term.
We can maybe take over that organization.
Yeah, somebody needs to
There
go.
was a
Can we
time when the
lose
phrase
that?
color was very progressive.
Yeah.
There was one
Or just another C,
just as
cannabis colored
a
people.
quick sort of interesting story. This week I had bookmarked an article that was about a pro-medical marijuana event in Arkansas that was going to be not hosted, backed by, financially basically backed by Budweiser.
Oh yeah, that's
So
it.
this came up, and I was like, wow, that's really
Wow.
interesting.
Yeah.
Budweiser was they had a very small
Sponsor.
little article about it. And when I went back to get the article up for the show today,
down, yeah.
it does say this article has been removed per
Well, you know, there
request
was-
from the people involved. So I didn't
There
know
was
what the
some
story
confusion,
was,
yeah,
but
yeah. Budweiser says they never said that they were going to sponsor that, and it appears to be a situation where one of their subsidiaries or local distributors or something
said, we'll sponsor it. They were
may or may not have talked to somebody. There was confusion. Budweiser says they weren't in the loop, and so
But there is a larger issue here. I mean, the messaging about marijuana is safer than alcohol. Some of the alcohol associations in Washington got in touch with me, and they're like, why are these people bashing us? Don't they understand we're going to be regulated the same way
Because
as
they
they
kill
are?
thousands of people a year.
But the intoxication component of alcohol and tobacco and marijuana. I mean, there's these questions of who are you throwing under the bus?
Yeah,
fair
it's
enough, fair
it's sort of
enough.
like when your parents bust you and you point out everything your sister or brother
Exactly,
did
right.
to throw some heat off yourself. That's what they feel like we're doing to them by
exactly.
pointing
It's a tricky
out
message.
that
It
it
is a
is.
tricky message.
Whereas
That would
pot
be a
is
great-
much safer than alcohol, and people need to know that.
Right.
It is. I can see.
But saying
how they
regulate
can be.
marijuana like wine is a positive statement as opposed to bashing your sister. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Go along with that.
Save your sister.
Before we
wine?
get to our dope of the week, there was one other sort of fun article that came out in the about marijuana this week, and in Denver, they use this device. It's called the Nasal Ranger. Has anybody heard of this?
No.
It's
All right,
like
it's called.
some
like a
smell
sex
in
I'm
the
gonna
spot, yeah.
I'm gonna try to.
You have to
there's a
breathe
picture of
into it.
I thought
I'm
it
gonna
was
try and show
what?
it to our camera.
Whoa.
But
Yeah.
let's see what we can
It's a breather.
That's
Like
going to
a-
be flying off
like-
the shelves
Yeah.
like those care rats.
So you see, here's the guy. He's got what looks like a megaphone, but instead of going to your mouth, it goes up to your nose and can smell marijuana. It is not. The article goes on to say it is
Because it
not.
doesn't smell enough. I mean,
No. This is a machine that's been around
okay.
for a very long time. It is for complaints on odors. Like I live close to this pig farm, and it's constantly going on. So they bring this guy is the guy in California that they call out
Smell-o-matic.
with his.
It's binoculars
Smell-o-matic
His
for your
nasal
nose.
ranger. It's binoculars for your nose, and there's a certain process, and it's it's a certain amount.
That is bullshit. That's a megaphone with a different end.
So yeah, it is. So
The guy just put some rubber on the end of a megaphone.
yeah, in Denver
And he
when
shows up and people, yep, weed.
In Denver, when a complaint is filed about a marijuana odor in the area, the Department of Public Health's Ben Siller is called out with his field olfactometer to sniff around and see if the law has been broken. And he's actually said that all these complaints about large marijuana smells and odors from grows, they don't even come close to registering on the smellometer.
I wonder how you get
but,
that job
people-
and how much it pays.
It's a good job, though.
Yeah,
Wouldn't it be a
wow,
great,
just going around smelling grows all the time. Oh, this is a good grow. This is not a good grow.
I know he prefers that in the pig farming.
He's a lot happier when he goes out and uses this machine.
I want to fart into that machine.
Just see what
guy
happens.
is on the other.
It depends how close you are and how toxic.
And what you
you
could
are.
eat.
Yeah.
So let's move on to dope of the week. We
Yeah,
had
dope of
we had a lot of talk about this before we came in
What
here
a
into the
dope.
studio. But why don't you guys explain who he is?
Well, the dope of the week is
Edward?
right here in Los Angeles. It's Edward R. Turner, Bishop. Edward R. Turner, who is a clergyman here in Los Angeles, but he's also the president of the Sheriff Lee Baca's, Los Angeles Sheriff Lee Baca's Interfaith Council at the Sheriff's Department, which, by the way, pays $105,000 a year to be the president of
Taxpayer
Interfaith
money.
Council. That's a city job, and this guy was also simultaneously he owns a business that's a building that's across the street from his church. So he's got his church on one side, his property owns on the other side of the street, and it was housing an illegal marijuana dispensary. He's been placed on paid leave, so he's still getting his $100,000 a year, paid leave while they investigate the fact that the sheriff's clergyman and right-hand man
Was breaking the law.
simultaneously harboring an illegal marijuana dispensary. So he is on paid leave pending further investigation.
I don't know how this guy can walk with balls that huge.
Well, he's a man of God.
Well, he's a man guy breaking
That
the law.
road covers a lot.
Oh
That
my
road
God.
To
covers a
have
lot
it
of-
across the
The
street.
clusterfuck that has happened in the city of Los Angeles with every Dick, Tom, and Harry that wants to come in opening a dispensary, and then this
Johnny,
man
watch your
works.
language.
I'm sorry, I'm really pissed off about this.
You can't say Harry.
I'm sorry. Yes, I can. He is not only works for Lee Baca, he's not only a clergyman, but he owns a church, and across the street from the church, he opens an illegal pot dispensary where they're carrying money across the street to him in large envelopes. Give me a break. He needs to go to jail.
The other reason that
So-
he's the dope of the week is, of course, this prompted a backlash from Sheriff Baca, who historically has not been a big opponent of medical cannabis, but certainly not a fan of ours. And, of course, Sheriff Baca is in the news after the story broke, repeating all the stereotypes and nonsense about killing brain cells and bringing crime and all of that, which is, of course, different from what he was saying 4 years ago when we were talking about regulating medical cannabis.
Yeah, and he can't even go to church now to get any of it off of his chest.
At least not his
He's got
church.
nowhere to go.
Gotta go to
So
another
the anger
church.
just has to sit in him.
He can take it out on people out in the field.
He will.
The drug war dopes really do come out and
Yes.
show their colors
Bishop Turner, the dope of the
strongly.
week.
Bishop Turner, the dope of the week.
David, anything you'd like to let us know about Reason that goes beyond the drug war? I know you
Well,
do
actually,
a lot of work
in the drug war, we have a feature-length documentary we've just released called America's Longest War, and it zeroes in on the violence aspects of drug prohibition. So it talks about the mass incarceration, it talks about the disproportionate effect on minority communities, and it also, the crew went down to Juarez and shot on location in Juarez, and they have some, they came back changed.
I'm sure.
And so there's some really difficult footage about what's gone on in Mexico with 50,000 drug war deaths over the last few years. And that's a consequence of our U.S. drug policy. So it's America's Longest War. It's available on Amazon.
On Amazon.
So yeah, we encourage people to check that out.
That's great. Great work that you guys do, and I know that you take up the cause of liberty for many other issues, not just the marijuana issue. You're about freedom, and
That's right.
yeah. We really thank you for coming on.
it's my
David.
pleasure.
Awesome to have you there. Let's see what else we've got going on in the news here. Most of the news that I'd been reading this week really were focusing on Washington and Colorado coming on board in January, the difficulties with the taxation, as we've talked about, the difficulty with the process of applying to open up a business.
That's that bar going up, right? It's getting harder and harder.
But it's going to be interesting, I think, at the first of the year to start seeing and tracking how legal marijuana.
I thought it was very interesting to see how this debate in Washington and Colorado influences things in Congress and in the state legislatures around the country. Because there's a movement afoot in most of the states right now to either legalize or implement. So I think what happens in Washington and Colorado will be very instructive. And it may go well. Things may smooth out. What I worry about is that there'll be controversy and that may prompt more federal action. Remember, we did this once before, right? Back in 2009, we had the first memo from the Department of Justice that seemed to wave a green flag at the cannabis industry, and things got really big and controversial.
And really what it did was just open a door for everybody,
Well,
and then people walked in and got...
They overreacted to it, and I hope we don't see that again. I hope we've learned a lesson, and it seems like these, I guess these top-down solutions may be less likely to encourage that kind of thing, but I don't know for sure. People often look at opportunity and will rush in and
try to take advantage of that. Yeah,
sure. That spirit may not be wrong, but when you have to realize that your actions have consequences for the rest of the community, and so I hope folks will be prudent in how they innovate.
Well, they're all committing civil disobedience every day against federal law, and they're doing taking huge risks for themselves. There's no question we need federal repair. We need to reschedule cannabis out of Schedule 1 at minimum. But there are enforcement priorities versus treatment priorities. There's a lot that can be done in the budgeting side. Just thing upon thing upon thing that the federal government
if the
can do to fix
federal
the
government can
situation.
step back and let the states experiment with this and figure out a way to do it, that might be a good solution. Just to get out of the way and let the states figure it out.
Right. The only way that happens is to change the Controlled Substances Act. I mean, it can't be done by somebody wiggling their nose or writing a memo and pretending that everything has changed. Because the entire apparatus is organized around drug and quantity.
And unfortunately,
they're sworn to uphold the law.
It's holy writ, though. That Controlled Substances Act is so hard to get at that because it's the cornerstone of a huge federal policy.
That's right.
But it has to be addressed. So what
changed.
is that way forward? You've done it now legally.
There's legislation in Congress that would require the federal government to respect state medical marijuana laws, which is a step in the right direction. Yeah. There's legislation to allow affirmative defense in federal court for medical cannabis charges, which would let the courts be a check on the Justice Department's overzealous enforcement. So there are things there, but we have to build that safe space for politicians to get behind them. And so it really comes back to what we mention every week: is people need to be involved.
Call your representatives
in this federal policy, because
Call your
we
reps.
talk to folks and say, "Have you been hearing about this states' rights to medical marijuana bill?" And they say, "No, no one calls about it.
Yeah,
No one's called us."
Politicians don't lead; they follow. So
you have to really bring them to the water.
Listen,
You
write a
have to
letter,
make
send an
sure-
email, make a phone call, or don't forget, there's a district office somewhere in your neighborhood. Go in
You can
person.
go visit.
You can just stop by unannounced.
Thanks again,
Thank
David
you so
Knott,
much.
for being here, president of Reason Foundation. And once again, people can see the work that you're doing and get involved with the work that you're doing at reason.com, reason.org. Get online, check out what they're doing. Thanks for being here. And Kenny, thanks for joining our conversation.
Sure, you'll come back.
Sure.
And visit a lot.
And everyone out there, thank you for sticking with us and enjoying this conversation. And we will see you next week.
Pura vida.
Pura vida.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey, everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.